Next curve.
Hey everybody, this is Leonard Lee, Executive Analyst at Next Curve, and welcome to this Next Curve reThink podcast episode where we break down the latest tech and industry events and happenings into the insights that matter. And in this Silicon Futures episode, we will be talking about 2024 and the month of December. This is our wrap-up episode. And yes, I am joined by the XPU, and that's with the small x, accelerated Karl Freund of Cambrian-AI research, and the astronomical Jim McGregor of the famed TIRIAS research. So gentlemen, welcome. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And Jim, you look really purple there, my friend.
That's the goal.
Yeah, are you trying to make it a pride there?
It is definitely a branding thing. We are the perfect.
I don't have my brand shirt on. I got my brand doggy. I got Daisy. Does that count?
Yeah, I'll take the
mascot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take the brand dog any day of the week. You know, nice, fluffy, pet him. You know, keeps you company. So, yeah, everybody, this is the last installment of Silicon Futures for 2024 because, yes, we are at the end of the year, and we're going to cover what was big in December. There was a lot of stuff that happened in December, a lot of very pivotal things, I think, I would say. A crazy way to end the year. And then we'll also provide broader highlights. The gentlemen will share their thoughts on what were the things that mattered in 2024 as a whole. So why don't we get started? And I think if we're to think about December 2024, we would have to think about Intel, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was a rough month.
Just the departure of Pat Gelsinger and kind of throwing Intel's future and their roadmap up in the air, depending on, when we have a new CEO and what that new CEO wants to do, to what remains, despite some of their, setbacks, what remains still one of the most powerful companies in our industry. I mean, that's just huge.
And the role they'll play in the U.S. economy, technology economy, with the foundry business is vitally important to the U.S. global competitiveness and potentially resiliency should something untoward happen in Taiwan. So, I was really surprised. I would have liked, frankly, if I can say it, I would have rather Pat fired the board. So the board asking Pat to leave or Pat deciding to leave. We don't know which, but I thought Gelsinger had the right strategy and he was executing, and it takes time to turn a ship that big around. And the board just I guess they got impatient.
No, I think there was some investor push there too, but still, I completely agree with you, Karl. I think, all of us that were watching and have been watching the industry for a long time knew that it was going to take up to 5 years for their product turnaround. And they're well into that, with Lunar Lake and with Xeon 6 and everything else that's going on. And the foundry strategy was always a 10-year strategy, especially to become a major competitive foundry. And they executed on those new process nodes. They're entering production, at least with their products, on 18A. We don't expect customer products until the middle part of the year. So, I mean, they are hitting those targets.
Yeah.
I mean,
for the most part. But I think it was always a really aggressive plan, right? And it required perfect execution. But then also, I think it also needed patience and support. And I think Pat lost it toward the end. And whether it's bad politics, which I think it is, just simply because of some of the toxicity that's kind of leaked out as things transpired with his departure. I mean, it just doesn't look right. But I agree with you. It's like, wait a minute. 2025 is going to be the pivotal year where we really see the fruits of this whole strategy at least start to ramp up and prove its viability and its promised impact, right? And along the way, I thought there's going to be some hiccups, right? Definitely hiccups, because this, and especially when you consider the broader macro and broader industry trends and how the landscape has shifted, especially with generative AI and the data center segment. So there's a lot of complexities that were introduced, a lot of threats that had to be responded to, because with Lunar Lake, they had to push that stuff up as quickly as possible, right? There were a lot of things that put pressure on the roadmap, and I don't know. I think a lot of the smart adjustments were underappreciated, but definitely Q2, right? That particular earnings result
Fiasco.
was definitely a big shock, and I think it is also sort of an outcome of having split out the financials between product and foundry. Right?
And also hindsight is 2020. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody knew, that the PC market and other segments of the market were going to kind of slow down significantly after COVID. Not to mention, I think if you had that hindsight, we probably would have seen larger cuts in terms of operating expenses earlier on. And that really hurt not making those cuts. But that's also part of Pat. Pat is really focused on keeping the talent and keeping the people and trying to keep them focused. So, hindsight's 2020. I still think he had the right strategy. I still think he was the right person for the job. I think it's going to be a challenge to find somebody that is willing to take the job going forward.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of rumors of who that might be, but I suspect all the superstars that are on that list would not be interested. Right? It's a high risk proposition, and I don't know what you would change. I mean, the board must not have liked something. Maybe they had a fallout over spitting out foundry services. I don't know.
Well, I know they had a fallout over cuts. Some board members wanted deeper cuts earlier on. And in hindsight, that would have been good. But however, I still think that it's going to be a challenge. I think there might be an opportunity here, though. Intel is still, I don't see anybody just acquiring them outright because they're so huge and it really takes to run a foundry. However, there might be some opportunity for some strategic acquisitions on the Intel side or a merger with somebody that might be a better fit.
Yeah. I mean, so my thoughts, and I'd love your reactions to this bullet point of things that I'm going to share with you. I know that there's a lot of interest in finding an external, quote unquote, permanent CEO. MJ is in there right now, splitting the temporary CEO role with Dave, right? Mm-hmm. But why do they need to look externally? And what's wrong with MJ?
To appease the board. To appease the board and really to appease investors. And you have to remember that there are so many parties involved in this. It's not just Intel, it's its customers, its supply chain, it's the governments. Governments, especially the EU and the US, are investing a lot into Intel going forward, so they have a vested interest. So, I mean, I think there's so many outside interests in what happens at Intel that you almost have to bring somebody in from the outside that is going to have a new perspective to really appease all those parties.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I think if you got somebody from inside, that would imply minimal change. And that's obviously not what investors want. Certainly not what the board wants. So I think they will have to go outside. And I think finding somebody good enough to do that job is this willing to take that job. I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough sell.
Right.
I mean, I told him no.
Yeah, but I think we've spent the earlier part of this this particular segment arguing that things shouldn't necessarily change, and we give the roadmap time, right? And so
that's my view.
Thinking they need to, number one, they need a customer for IF, and the customer is Intel. The person who made the call into whether or not they're going to go internal for Lunar Lake or external with TSMC. I mean, at some point it had to be MJ. She's the customer. Go customer
but
first.
that
No.
customer was made 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That decision was made 2 years ago. So, I mean, it's really hard to look at that and use that as a judgment call because they had, I mean, Pat was really just gearing up that IDM 2.0 strategy when Lunar Lake was beginning work and they had to make that decision or reaching a point where they had to make that decision, I should say. So it's, and that's the hard thing is there's so many things in timing, you got to remember
Yeah.
that when Pat inherited Intel or took over Intel, there were already a lot of things in the works, and some were good, some were bad. So, I mean, he had to weed through that. But we didn't really see, it still takes 2 to 3 years for those decisions to really start having an impact. So we just really started to see the Pat Gelsinger era.
Yeah, exactly. And so just when his projects are coming to light and actually looking pretty good, they decide to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And if I look at it and say, well, if there's one mistake from a product standpoint that he made, it might have been the Gaudi transition over to a GPU based architecture. That's a very tough transition to make. And Gaudi 3 sales and Gaudi 2 sales show that the impact of that. Nobody wants to buy a dead end product. It's actually a very good product. And given the supply constraints that the industry is suffering under, you would think, or apparently Intel thought, that people would look past that and say, don't worry, they'll take care of us. But I don't think they have the trust of the customers to say, don't worry, we'll take care of you in this transition to a GPU-based architecture.
Yeah, the even announcing that transition pretty much shot them in the foot.
Yeah, they shouldn't have announced it. They should have called it Gaudi 4.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well,
that's what I told them anyway, but they didn't.
Right, but what would you think would have to change? I mean, there's a lot of talk about, hey, we need to bring somebody from the outside to institute some kind of change. What change are we talking about? What is
the spin-off thing? Spinning out IF.
Yeah, but I don't think you can do that for 2 to 3 years. You can't do that until it's at least profitable or at least break even.
Right.
So,
you wouldn't get what you want in terms of selling it. You wouldn't get the kind of price you want for IF until they can demonstrate that they have turned the corner and they are, going to be a rocket ship. So,
but that just sounds like a disaster, right? If that were,
I agree. I would.
Strategy was to let's spin off. I mean, if this whole thing is about spinning off IF, at this moment it would be a disaster.
Well,
right.
I would agree. I think it would be a disaster right now. I think no matter what, you have to have somebody that's going to come in with a vision for what Intel is. And that's what Pat had. He had a vision for Intel. Unfortunately, they didn't have the time he needed to really execute that vision. But this kind of goes back to something I've been saying for quite some time now. Everyone's looking at AI, and AI is a thing. And Intel kind of has missed the boat so far on AI, at least on the data center side so far.
Oh, yeah.
So to look at that and say, okay, well, Intel needs to be an AI company. What does that mean? Companies are looking at how they use AI to make themselves more efficient, and they're also looking at how AI changes their products and services. But very few companies are taking that third step and saying, how's AI going to change my business? What does my business look like once AI enters the market over the next decade? I asked that of Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, and he looked at me dead in the face and said, Jim, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And that's actually a good answer because he's always looking. A lot of companies aren't looking. So just to say that you need to be in AI is not enough. You need to be able to look up and say, what is my company going to be in this AI era? And it may be completely different. It may be more services. It may be more, we don't know. We really don't know.
Yeah.
I think the automotive market segment is a good example of that. The traditional value chain is being blown apart when you start looking at autonomy. Some of the tier one or some of the OEMs are developing their own technology. They're going to be offering cars as a service. They're even looking at insurance. So, I mean, all of a sudden, that whole value chain is kind of shot. You even have some of the major tier ones like Magna International that's actually designing and producing cars for the OEMs. So, I mean, it's really going to be difficult to really look at the next 10 years and not question what your company is going to look like.
I'd like to see Intel ramp up their services with the goal being not only generate for high profit revenue like Marvell and Broadcom are enjoying for AI customized AI chips, but also to help people get the most out of IF. And so if you combine those two thoughts, I can see a very, very nice business or potentially an acquisition that would get them into that space as a really net new revenue for them.
And with their leadership in process technology and their leadership in packaging technology, I think they'd have a huge benefit in doing those customized chips. And that's always been part of the plan. But once again, they haven't reached that part yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is interesting that at Marvell Industry Analyst Day, what we saw is and Jim, you and I think, is it Jim or no, Carl? You and I had a segment on custom AI chips, right? And how that's probably going to be that next opportunity, and it's kind of the impression that you got when you were there at the Marvell Industry Analyst Day, right? Is that I mean, and let's be honest, the reason why everyone's going bonkers about AI is because of generative AI. And one of the interesting things that we're seeing is this divided generative AI supercomputing universe. One side is for operational AI. This is where you're seeing Amazon and Meta and Google and the like building their own custom systems for their custom enterprise operational needs, right? Because these are the companies that are going to be deploying generative AI and its derivatives at some large scale, right? And it's probably going to be mostly for like recommender engines or enhancing them, or some of this agentic stuff that Meta is talking about. And then you have the other side, which is the stuff that is catered to model building, where the GPU with the software defined layer and all the benefits that Jensen talks about of being programmable and extensible, that's like caters at the supercomputing level to a different market, which is model building and some of this more experimental stuff that's happening around the enterprise.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that impressed me in the latter part of this year is sort of this emergence of that operational generative AI supercomputing side of the story.
Well, I think in a similar vein, one of the things that impressed me in 2024 was how well the cloud service providers have improved their ability to make competitive silicon.
Yeah.
So what that means, I mean, if you look at Trillium from Google, if you look at Trainium 2 from AWS,
which were announced in December, right?
Yeah, announced in December. You say, well, okay, let me think about this. So all these guys are building these massive supercomputers for AI that nobody else can afford to build, by the way.
Yeah.
Except for potentially governments. But in terms of commercial enterprises, nobody else can afford to build these models. So that means that means the market for semiconductors being sold into AI building applications is really the cloud service provider. So now you're a cloud service provider, and you say, well, okay, I've got NVIDIA. That's great. That's what the market wants. I'll keep buying tons of NVIDIA. I've got my own chip, which I kind of like. In fact, I'm telling all my engineers to use it and optimize for it. So that's good. Why do I need a third chip? And if you go down that route, then you say, well, is there room for AMD and Intel, back to the subject, Is there really room there? And I'm starting to think, I haven't concluded, but I'm starting to think the answer is no. And that may be one of the reasons why AMD's excitement around the MI 300, 325, 350 has ebbed a little bit,
Yeah.
is because the market's going away from them. The market's not really attracted. If you want to build, if you want to build your own, you can do that, right?
Yeah.
With Marvell and Broadcom and Tenstorrent, right? You can build your own with chiplet technology that maybe will solve your need at a better price point than acquiring semiconductors from somebody else.
Yeah, but
So I don't know.
also remember that AMD makes a very good business doing custom chips
Yeah,
for
they
other
do.
markets.
Yeah, yeah, and I think they're likely to move heavily into the automotive space,
Mm.
which would be a natural place for them to go with their strengths in CPUs, their strength in GPUs, strength in FPGAs. Boy, that would just be that'd be a rocket ship for them. They've probably got a better story to tell there than they're telling.
Well, I think we're still in this trend of, or I would say the beginning of making AI more economical. So everything is still so expensive, whether you're using a custom chip or whether you're using an off-the-shelf chip. It's still very expensive to do AI. I mean, we're improving efficiency by leaps and bounds, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be to really be able to make it, be able to roll it out across enterprises, much less make it adaptable to consumer applications.
Yeah,
So it's I think we're still a couple years away before we really reach that efficiency point. And both Jensen and Pat had made statements that the new unit of compute is the data center. And I completely agree with that. You have to start developing from the building level on down
Yeah.
to improve efficiency. And there's 1,000 different things you can do from, the type of infrastructure you put in, from the network to the cooling systems to the rack design. NVIDIA's NVL72 was a huge leap forward this year. And they opened it up through open compute so that anybody can actually use that design and modify that design. Matter of fact, Meta's already done it. So it's a huge leap forward.
yeah. Well, meanwhile, the software is demanding more performance, which is
Oh yeah.
kind of surprising. I thought by the end of this year we'd start to see the efficiency curve kick in, but OpenAI's O3 is,
Mhm.
I mean, everything I'm reading, I'm like, I don't know how you conclude this is not artificial general intelligence for certain segments, not for everything. Maybe it's semi-general intelligence, but it
Yeah,
is
that's really hard to
really amazing technology, and it requires 10 times the amount of compute
Yes.
and
Yeah.
than ChatGPT is using today.
Yeah.
10x
Well,
more
and
compute. Right?
that's probably the most impressive thing I think for 2024 is the race by the hyperscalers or by these major AI companies just to give stuff away. And the reason is because they want to be the de facto standard. They want to have the models that you use to recreate your models or to use in your application, whether it's the huge models, hundreds of millions or billions or trillions of parameters, or it's the, couple billion parameter models that you can fit on pretty much anything. But they are racing forward. I mean, Meta. I mean, what can you say about Meta with Llama? I mean, they're racing forward just as fast as OpenAI is.
Yeah, and IBM with their latest Granite is a small
Exactly.
model that outperforms large models, and of
Yeah.
course that's going to fuel a lot of opportunity for IBM consulting to go in there and help people modify and optimize for specific business purposes.
Yeah.
So I think you're right, Jim, and I, you come back to the silicon aspect of it and say, okay, where's all this going to run?
Yeah. And
First tier and
It's a
second tier.
huge question. It's a huge question. And I still think, and 2024 was the year of the AI PC. But
Yeah.
we don't really have a lot of things that run on the PC from an AI perspective. It's still
Yeah.
mostly in the cloud.
But I mean,
Yeah.
guys, I have to be honest with you. Those are red flags, right? You do have all these massive amounts of investments being made, and I think in probably three buckets, right? Number one, the experimental model building, supercomputing. The other is the hyperscaler operational stuff for some ridiculous workloads that most companies don't have. I don't know how much of that will be able to be scaled down, like you're suggesting, and brought to the edge. And then there's the edge stuff, right? The things that are related to PCs and even smaller smartphones, right? And there are a lot of red flags, quite honestly, because if you look above the stack, monetization of models themselves, very, very difficult. I don't think anyone's cracked the code on that. Number two,
Right.
even at the services level, so you go up a layer, monetization of services is actually very challenging. With Satya Nadella on a podcast recently, really asking the question, who are those service providers that have more than X number of, it was actually a pretty small number of daily active users. And he's miffed by it, he himself. And so there's a lot of red flags. Then there's still that big question of how quickly can the ROI, the return part of the ROI equation for the ecosystem be accelerated, because the POCs are not proving out exponential value that will pay for all the investments happening in technology and infrastructure. So but those are I think for analysts, those are the things that we hopefully can bring insight to, so that the ecosystem can start anticipating the problems to be solved, because these are pretty big problems to solve, right?
Yeah, but we've seen this happen time and time again with the tech industry. Come on, I mean, we saw it with the bust around the turn of the century. We saw it with 3D TV. Man, that was a bust. We saw it with the internet, where you had a whole bunch of companies rushing in and no business models to make money initially. So it's I think it's just the nature of innovation in our industry. Everyone rushes ahead. And you just have to see what filters out. I mean, eventually a couple of the major players stay up there. A couple of the major players fall off the map, and some of them, if they're lucky, just kind of find a new middle ground. So and always there's always new companies that rise to the top that we didn't expect.
Right? They become the Google, because everyone thought that Yahoo was going to be the king of the hill for.
Yeah, but where was Google when it came to social networking?
They're in a lab.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, every company. So, I mean, even Google has had its ups and downs with some of these transitions. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, come on. How long are we going to wait for an Apple car?
Forever. You asked, okay, and you used the bad word "bust." Come on, Jim. Can't say bust.
It happens. Although no. I really, a couple of people have kind of mentioned these waves or these super cycles. Jensen did it. Victor Peng did it when he was talking at Hot Chips, saying, "Listen, we have several cycles we're going to go through with AI," and I really agree with this kind of mindset. First it's really about the data center, and then it's about the enterprise, and then it's about the consumer. And now those overlap, but it's going to that's probably a decade to look at that period at least. So it's going to take time.
I want to highlight something. AI actually reared its head in smartphones for in terms of commercial application, broad commercial application, before anything else, right?
And nobody noticed. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it was used for computer photography. It's been used for battery management. It's been used AI has been used for several generations in smartphones to improve the user experience. But it wasn't really necessarily something that the consumer latched onto.
I think
Nor
that
is it
could be,
something the consumer would pay for, right?
Yeah.
It was Samsung versus Apple versus uh, all the other manufacturers, and they're going to make money whether you use that AI agent on that device or not. That's very different than what we're seeing today with the data center, where people
yeah,
are spending a ton of money, hundreds of billions of dollars in the next couple of years to outfit the data center with AI capabilities. Now, so the question becomes,
yeah,
okay, how is that paid for? Where's the monetization of all those
yeah,
investments? And how's that going to play out? And I don't think we know yet. I
No.
think that's why I think we're still in the picks and shovels phase of growing AI,
yeah, yeah.
and that's why NVIDIA has done so well. That's why AMD and now especially Intel are struggling because nobody wants the picks and shovels.
Yeah, yeah. Now, hey, let's move on to the other big thing that happened in December, which is this thing that happened in Delaware. And I don't know, Jim,
There
can you
was
tell
something
us
in Delaware?
it was something happened in
What was in Delaware? I don't think.
I don't
Yes, you're referring to the you're referring to the long anticipated. It took 2 years to litigate and finally get to court. The ARM versus Qualcomm trial. ARM sued ARM, the IP company, sued its largest licensee, Qualcomm, over the acquisition of Nuvia and the use of
yeah,
Nuvia technology. And I'll be honest with you, I read through the pre-court proceedings and everything else leading up to this. What was presented in court didn't match that. And then the questions that the jury had to answer were completely unexpected from that. And it was so confusing. But
yeah,
really, if I can simplify it a little bit, what it really came down to was Nuvia was a startup. They were given what is kind of a golden ticket by ARM, and that is an architecture license agreement where they can develop their own microarchitecture and use the ARM instruction set architecture on top of it and go after the server market. And pretty much everyone knew it's a startup. There's a good potential they're going to get acquired. Well, they did get acquired. They got acquired by Qualcomm. Although Qualcomm really didn't want to use the technology for servers, they wanted to use it to really go after the traditional markets, which are smartphones and going into automotive and XR and all these other markets they're trying to expand into. Now really competing against what Apple and others have done with their architecture licenses. Now the question comes in of when obviously Qualcomm already had an architecture license and a very broad one that pretty much covered anything they wanted to do because they've developed their own CPUs in the past. Um, and it extends out fully extended to 2033 with very reasonable royalty rates. Well, Nuvia being a startup, they kind of said, listen, if you help us out a little bit, you'll get more royalties on the back end. Well, it turns out they didn't really help them out too much on the front end. They did pay quite an extensive license fee, and they were going to pay higher royalty rates. ARM wanted Qualcomm to assume those royalty rates. Qualcomm said, we don't need to. We have our own architecture license. And then ARM said, well, you're assuming ARM IP. And they're like, well, not really. We're assuming a microarchitecture. And that's really where the debate came in is what technology was Nuvia's, what
yeah,
technology was ARM's, and what's the responsibility of Qualcomm. There were three answers that the jury was given, or three questions the jury was given. One, did Nuvia violate their architectural license agreement with ARM? The second question was, did Qualcomm violate the Nuvia agreement, which is kind of ludicrous since they were never a party to that agreement,
yeah,
and they weren't even allowed to see the agreement until they acquired the company.
yeah.
And third and this is the countersuit by Qualcomm, are the products that Qualcomm has developed covered under the using both their technology and using the Nuvia technology, are they covered under the Qualcomm ALA
Yeah.
architecture license agreement? Well, the jury couldn't decide on whether Nuvia violated or not. That was the first question, and I'm not surprised because
Yeah.
Nuvia added some terminology in, ARM added some terminology into an agreement that got really confusing.
Yeah.
And we never saw the entire agreement, even though I was in the courtroom. They picked and choose different parts of it, and it was obvious this was a bad contract. It was
Yeah.
not very well worded. There was a lot of confusion around it. So if the parties couldn't agree to what it meant, I'm not surprised the jury couldn't agree to what it meant. The
Yeah.
second question, did Qualcomm violate the Nuvia agreement? No. And is Qualcomm's technology or new products covered under their ALA? Yes. So for the most part, it was a win for Qualcomm, and also some of the things, and this is the scary part about going to trial with another company, is you always know things are going to come out you don't expect or that are proprietary. Well, and mud's going to come out. Well, most
Yeah.
of the mud was kind of on the ARM side. It was pretty clear that they had a strategy to try to push Qualcomm to higher royalty rates, not to mention the rest of the industry. Um, Qualcomm was kind of, best practices. And Qualcomm, has been accused of kind of being a patent bully in the past.
Yeah.
They operated, with good intentions, and there was nothing to indicate that they didn't operate with the best of intentions throughout the trial. So it was a little bit of, mud on the face of ARM, and they have to deal with that, especially as they're interacting with their customers going forward.
Yeah.
So,
And also, I think there's a. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead, Jim.
no, that's pretty much where it stands.
Oh, interrupt away.
It basically reinforces the impression that that ARM is simply struggling to be competitive. And it took Nuvia engineers. They actually in court talked about how the Nuvia engineers were trying to help the ARM engineers improve their architecture.
Right.
And so, it's innovate or die. And if ARM doesn't figure out how to innovate, and you're not going to innovate by spending all this money suing your largest customer, and had they won, can you imagine how ridiculous that would be? Oh yeah, okay, we're going to shut this down because it's too good.
Oh,
No,
and it would have basically killed the AI PC from, based on Windows on ARM.
right. So there
Yeah.
goes the opportunity for ARM, goes out the window. So it's just a poorly conceived
Well,
strategy and poorly executed.
well, and it really brought to light one of the key issues. ARM has kind of a hole in its business model. It offers two types of licenses: a TLA license where somebody uses their standard cores, transfer technology
Yeah.
license agreement, and then they have the ALA where somebody can develop their own stuff and just make it ARM compatible. And the problem is they always knew that there was a potential for competition there. If somebody's licensing your IP and your hard cores, you're going to get a higher royalty fee. If all of a sudden they decide, like Apple did, which is probably the best example, to go to their own custom cores, that license rate's going to go down. And you got to remember that the companies that they're selling to typically have higher R&D budgets and much, much higher, I mean, multiple times higher revenue than ARM itself. So it's a challenge. And I think that's one reason why it would have been great if ARM was part of a larger entity, whether it was NVIDIA, which that deal didn't go through, or somebody else. SoftBank hasn't really effectively leveraged it, unfortunately. But it really exposed something that's been developing for the past decade, and that is that ARM created a business model that's going to compete against itself with that ALA. And going forward, we've seen this especially in the server environment where most of the major people going after servers with the ARM architecture have developed their own microarchitecture. And, and we've seen this a couple of times where they basically said, listen, we needed something more customized and we could develop it better than ARM could. So it is a challenge.
Meanwhile, the attention and dollars have all shifted to AI, which
Yes.
ARM has really struggled to provide a decent product technology. Yeah, they got GPUs, but nobody's using them for AI.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so are they going to deselect AI? I think you deselect AI, you're dead.
Yeah.
There is no future without AI. So where is that going to come from?
Well, they're making their inroad, or at least their channel, or in tapping into the opportunities on the CPU core side of things, right? I mean, it's Neoverse and these other frameworks that are being leveraged by NVIDIA and others. I mean, that's really where that linkage is. How you qualify that in terms of, a business and what that has in terms of implications on the top and bottom line. I mean, those are things that are, if you guys have insights on that, then I think that would be a really interesting thing to analyze and understand. I don't know what you guys think, but I mean, yeah, on the accelerator side, definitely it'll show up on the map, right? But for every two Blackwell, there's a Grace sitting in the middle, right? So,
but also remember that NVIDIA itself has also developed its own custom ARM compatible process CPUs in the past.
right.
It's not out of the realm to think that if they have a lot of success with Grace, that they wouldn't do the same thing, especially if they get to a point where they think they can optimize it.
Well, haven't they?
Yep.
I mean, Grace. A lot of people don't talk about Grace because Cooper and Blackwell have stolen the headlines. But I mean, think about the implications of Grace itself, right?
Well, it's the only CPU. It's the only CPU in the world that speaks NVLink. That's all it has to do to fit in with NVIDIA's strategy. Now, could they do that with their own ARM architecture? Absolutely. Could they do it with RISC-V? You bet they could. Well, we haven't seen how this movie ends.
Well, and we've seen from all of the major players in the data center segment say that, listen, the CPU does matter in AI workloads. If you pair the right CPU, you improve the efficiency of the CPU, you're going to get better AI performance because some of the tasks you're going to be running on the CPU, and the CPU is going to make the entire system more efficient. So, I mean, even the messaging we've seen from Intel and we've seen from AMD plays well for Grace as well.
Yeah, and so, like we've been saying throughout the course of this year, it's about the system, and just having a myopic view on, let's say, the accelerator versus interconnect versus networking, front end, back end, and ignoring the CPU. All of a sudden, you just don't see the big picture, which is becoming. Like you said, it's about data center. This year, it was about the unit of compute we're talking about here is
data center.
Data center.
That's right. And that's why AMD acquired ZT Systems, right? To give them the skills they need to build their data centers.
Yeah,
and Pincendo.
Yeah. Wow, what a crazy year, huh?
It is a crazy year.
Yeah.
And I think Karl will completely agree with this statement. When it comes to AI, we're still learning how to learn. So it's still changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I think looking to 2025, we'll see the focus shift more towards the debate of artificial general intelligence. O3 really predicts that by offering something that's pretty close. I mean, it's as good as PhDs in mathematics. It's interesting. There's an article today that came out. Gary Marcus came out with a bet, 10-1 bet that we'll see AGI in by 2027. He says no, and the other guy, I can't remember his name. I apologize. An ex OpenAI guy says yes, we will. And the way they defined it was 10 tests that you'll have to pass. 3 of those are ridiculous. Like, okay, you got to write a novel that is a Pulitzer Prize candidate. You've got to write a screenplay that is a Oscar level screenplay. And let's see, what was the other one? You have to write. I can't remember. But it's like, no, that's not artificial general intelligence. That's artificial super intelligence, right? I don't know any Nobel laureates. I don't know any. I mean, it doesn't mean that doesn't mean the people I know are stupid. It's just they're not super intelligent.
Yeah, I try to stay out of that debate just because defining what it is hard. But do I think in performing specific tasks, it will be as good or better than humans? I think we're We're there on a couple, and I think we're going to, especially 2025, I agree with you. I think there's going to be so many of those tasks that AI
Wow.
can do as good or better than a human that you have to pay attention to it. You have to utilize it when you can. It's going to be a critical technology. And
Yeah.
once again, AI is the transition or the transformation of AI is very similar to I tell people take the impact of the PC and the impact of the internet and combine that, and you're still not close to the changes you're going to see with AI.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think you're right. I think you're right.
Well,
It's
and
well, 2025 is going to be a fun year to watch.
Okay.
That's for
what,
sure.
what about what are your thoughts? Since it sounds like we're wrapping this up with the
Well, no,
Yeah.
I would agree. I think 2025 is I think we're going to see kind of it is the year of the agentic AI, where we see more and more usable agents that really obscure. And it's funny because, first we had the internet and then we had apps that obscured the internet. Now we have AI that obscures the apps, obscures the data, even obscures the hardware platform. So, we're moving to another level of obscurity. And I really think that agentic AI gets us there. And I think we're going to see that this year. But I also think we're going to see start of that third wave or that third super cycle where we start seeing AI creep into more and more of those edge devices. Now, when I say AI, I'm not just saying I don't, a lot of those applications are never going to use generative AI.
Generative. Yeah.
But AI, traditional AI is still going to be critical for a lot of those applications. And I think I think we're going to see much more of that. So I'm excited not just about what we're going to see at CES, but I'm excited about things we're going to see at Embedded World and Mobile World Congress and some of these other events throughout the year where it's a much broader scope.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for me,
My prediction for CES is that the Eureka Park is probably going to be the most exciting place to be.
yeah. Hopefully, we won't see too many what do you call it, animatronic devices hooked up to a generative AI accidentally smacking people. That's kind of like what I saw last year. That's not a good sign.
A couple of years ago, I kept running into Stevie Wonder everywhere I went around Eureka Park, so I kind of felt like he was following me, even though I know that's not feasible. But I think I do think robotics is a key part of that, especially the humanoid robot. So, and we saw the humanoid robots come out in really start coming out en masse in 2024.
Sure. Right,
but
there you go.
They're not really that functional yet.
Yeah.
So I think 2025 we're going to start seeing some really practical applications for these robots.
But I have seen several actually hit people. So yes, make progress this year.
Did any of them hit you, Leonard?
No. I know enough to stay away. At least
I got to improve my programming skills.
No, beyond slap distance. Yes. Obviously, the guardrails weren't in place with those demos, but yeah, I mean, I think 2025 is going to be. And so here's my take. I don't know, you guys. See, I always get nervous, like sharing my thoughts with you guys because you always call me a hater or some weird crap like that. But anyway, it's going to be a desperate year. Like what we were talking about earlier, all of this investment needs to find end market return. And I think it's going a hell of a lot slower than people anticipated. And definitely for the expectations that were set 2 years ago. And so I think the challenge for 2025 is going to be doing exactly what you mentioned, Jim, is helping enterprise figure out how to find a value, helping them apply, leaders to apply that filter that will get them to value. But I think this is the more important thing. It's not about intelligence. It's about how these things are tools, because one of the things that historically we've seen with AI in general is that it is an augmenting technology. It typically is not core. But we're now led to believe that is core, despite what people have admonished us about, that that this is the core technology. And I think that's one of the things that is going to be really driven home in 2025 is that it is not core. It is indeed probably less than a co-pilot. It's something that is a tool, and you need to figure out the fit for purpose scenarios where it exhibits reliable and sustainable value. And I don't think people have figured out that equation yet. They don't even know about the equation yet. They certainly haven't solved that problem for their business. And until they do that, I think, Jim, we're not going to see companies figure out how AI is going to transform their business and how it's going to reshape things. I think, until these filters are really developed, which is going to be tough because it's going to be a dynamic filter. Like you said, it's constantly changing, right? Mm-hmm. But the big challenge is, how do I avoid making bad investments in this stuff that are not going to improve my business, but is gonna hydrate some applications and service providers at a certain moment that are going to prove to be, like what you said, part of that bust of the cycle, right? The super cycle. So I think I'm hopeful, just because I think these are great problems for analysts to help the industry understand and accelerate the path to value. And so I'm looking forward to working with you guys in 2025.
Well, I want to throw a monkey wrench into yours, because I'm very I have to. It's just me.
Jim.
Well, first off, I'm still very optimistic about where we're going and the innovation level we're seeing. But I'm going to put one caveat out there.
Please do.
Rare earth materials. I think that is the biggest concern. And, it goes all the way back to our political situation right now that we have. And I'm almost surprised that China hasn't put more restrictions on rare earth materials sooner, because it is a wrench that they can turn that we can't get through. And if anybody lived through the early 2000s in our industry, they remember the impact of the shortage of tantalum. Tantalum capacitors, just little capacitors, really froze up our market for quite a while because we didn't have enough tantalum. And the same thing can happen with the rest of the industry if we don't have rare earth materials.
Yeah. And there's a simple answer to that. The long game. And that's what we should consider. That's what should concern everyone.
Okay, Karl, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm more optimistic on the return on investment, and debate you and I have had quite a few times.
Yes, which I love, by the way. I appreciate.
I enjoy it too. It's great. It's great. I just look at what IBM has been able to do with their customers, their clients, and the kind of return on investment they've been able to make. And it's not all with generative AI. But it is using AI technology to solve real business problems and give a return on investment today. And so I think that gives us a solid foundation for 2025. Yeah. And as we add more generative AI applications, as affordability continues to improve, and the intelligence of our intelligent friends continues to improve, I think we have a very bright future. Yeah. And there's issues. I think the rare earth issue that Jim brought up is an important one for us to solve as an industry and as a country.
Yeah. Well, this is all I know. At the intersect of our three perspectives here, there's a better perspective. So that's what is a hopeful thing for me. Going into 2025. And so with that, gentlemen, thank you so much. I hope you have
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Great, holiday season. Happy New Year. Look forward to continuing our collaborations into 2025. And, why don't you both take a moment to share with the audience how they can get in touch with you in the new year, and where you would like for them to soak up all this wonderful insight and perspective and knowledge about the industry. Where should they go? Jim, why don't you start?
Okay. Definitely reach out to myself and my colleagues at TIRIASresearch.com. Our emails are easy. It's just the first name at TIRIASresearch.com. I'm a Jim at TIRIASresearch.com. And, definitely look out for the multitude, including, what we're doing here on Xcurve, but other channels that we leverage and we work with, including EE Times, Forbes.com, ECT News, Microelectronics in Taiwan, a multitude of other media channels that we'll be partnering with throughout 2025.
Wonderful.
And likewise, you can reach me at carl.freund at cambrian-ai.com. Visit our website to see our latest thinking on what's going on in the AI space. And likewise through Forbes and EE Times. If you have a question, give us a call.
Yeah. And right here.
Right here.
And right here.
Yes.
Although we have to add something in here for 2025.
Okay.
We have to add sound effects.
Okay. All right.
So when we don't agree with somebody with something that's being said, we can do a slap, or we can do a boing, or we can do something.
We need Jim Cramer's soundboard.
Yeah,
Jim Cramer.
soundboard. Yes.
See?
We'll have to figure that out. Maybe that'll become a Zoom feature, right? You'll have
There
to
you go.
vertical. Virtual. Yeah. Gentlemen, appreciate you both so much. And this is a great way of wrapping up the year and having both of you share your perspective with the Next Curve audience. And so everyone, thanks for tuning in. And remember to like, share, comment on this episode, and subscribe to the reThink podcast here on YouTube and on Buzzsprout. There you can get the audio version of our podcast and take us on the road on your jog. And you can access us through your favorite podcast platform, and also subscribe to the Next Curve research portal at www.next-curve.com for the tech and industry insights that matter. Happy New Year.
Happy New
Year.